Fond greetings from the Casa de Single Wide News Studios. Leroy, your humble reporter at your service. I do apologize for the little Spanish pause and putting out some news videos. I'm fighting some new software that will hopefully, in the near future, bring some far better production value to these videos until I get the bugs worked out of it and the operator malfunction taken care of. We'll be doing this for a little bit. Anyway, here now the news. As many of you are probably aware, the Derek Chauvin trial is underway, and so far, the prosecution has been bringing its case. The defense has yet to call any of its witnesses. Now, let me say straight up front, I am not a lawyer, although I've been kind of a law buff and sort of studied it on the side in various aspects. The legal system for the last 20 years, I am not a lawyer. I'm not anywhere close to being a lawyer. But I have been not only trying to keep up with the case as much as possible, but I've also been watching and listening to actual lawyers who are explaining what's going on, what needs to be proven, where the burden of proof lies, what needs to happen in order for second-degree murder or third-degree murder or second-degree manslaughter to become a convictable crime to the jury, supposedly at least. Anyway, some basics here. George Floyd, as pretty much everyone knows, died with a policeman, his knees on his back, neck, so on and so forth. He was saying that he couldn't breathe. We all saw a little cherry-picked video that was played 1,000,000 times over that I think horrified every single one of us. It certainly did me. My first impression was, this is police brutality. This has gone way too far. The policeman overstepped his boundaries and murdered the guy. That was my first impression of what I saw. Since then, I have learned more about the training, more about this particular hold that was being used, why they use it, so on and so forth. Seen different camera angles, learned more about toxicology reports, learned more about the autopsy, and I've learned more about the law as it pertains to this case. So I will try to give the condensed version of that as best I can. I've got a video under production that I will release after the defense gets to start calling its witnesses. Thus far, some things that I have learned that I did not know was, number one, I'd heard many different variants of this as far as how much drugs were in Mr. Floyd's system. What I am hearing now consistently is that he had consumed 3.5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. That was what was in his blood system. So, tolerance, no tolerance. I don't think there's any way that he would have survived this situation, whether anybody was on his back or not. As I understand, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It is hundreds, if not 1,000 times stronger than heroin in its pure form. So it doesn't take much to overshoot the runway on this stuff and end up dead. Now, some might think, oh, well, it's an open and shut case. George Floyd died of an overdose. Nothing the cop could do, no matter what he did, this man was going to die. That is not exactly the case. If, and this is what the prosecution has to prove, the prosecution has to prove that the action of the officer actually shortened George Floyd's life. If it shortened his life 1 second, then that could fall into the second degree or third degree murder charge coming to fruition. It would be like somebody's falling off a building, a 10-story building. They are pushed, they trip, they fall, whatever. They're already over the edge. They're falling to the ground, and somebody with a sniper rifle decides, for whatever reason, I'll shoot them before they hit the ground. And if they shoot them and that bullet wound is fatal, even though they were going to die when they hit the ground seconds later, the person with the rifle would be guilty of murder. That's kind of what we're looking at here in relative terms. So, something else that I didn't know before, the changing of the camera angles and whatnot. Well, first of all, this hold in some form or another is not only taught by many police departments all across the United States, it is used in many other countries as well. Now, one of the camera angles that on cross-examination, the police chief who actually fired these 4 officers and had them charged, including Derek Chauvin, he was asked about this one particular camera angle, and you could see, and I knew before from the autopsy report that there was bruising on the left shoulder. There was no bruising on the neck, and it would have been the side of the neck. That's not really a place where you try to, try to choke somebody to death with your hands on the side. You want to press in and shut the windpipe off. But from this particular camera angle, you could see that both knees were actually on the shoulder. He had the lower part of his leg may have been touching the neck, but this was a hold that was meant to hold him to the ground, and it did not appear in any way that he was cutting off oxygen as far as his ability to breathe. That does not appear to be the case. Now, maybe this moved around, and that wasn't the hold that was being made the entire time. But as far as he had his knee on his neck for, nearly 9 minutes or whatever, that was not the case. At least part of the time, perhaps all of the time, one knee was on the left shoulder, the other knee was on the right shoulder, and perhaps the bottom part of the leg where Derek Chauvin's leg was possibly laying across his neck, but there wasn't any major force being placed there. One of the things that the prosecution said, and some of those who had gone over the autopsy and said, okay, this is a possibility that the blood flow to the brain had been cut off. In order to do that, you have to cut both arteries off at the same time. And that's not really possible to happen. I have a friend who had surgery. He had the carotid artery was blocked, and they went in to clean that artery, but and did so, but when they tried to sew it back together, the sutures kept pulling through, and it didn't take, and they ended up just having to close the artery off altogether, and now he's just got the artery on the other side, feeding blood to the brain. So cutting the blood flow off to one's not going to do the job as far as killing someone. So the case is not looking good for the prosecution. Now, I hate police brutality. I despise it. I don't care what color the cop is. I don't care what color the perpetrator or victim is. It does not matter to me whatsoever. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care, except that justice is served. My main worry is that if Derek Chauvin is actually innocent and did everything as right as possible under the conditions, that the jury will feel so intimidated about the possibility of riots, the possibility of being doxxed and being personally harmed, that they're just going to go ahead and scream guilty to the highest charge possible in hopes that themselves and or the country is spared the riots and the uprisings and so on and so forth that many expect are going to happen if he is found innocent. I personally think it's going to happen regardless. If he's convicted of second-degree murder, then people will be mad that it wasn't first-degree murder. If it's manslaughter, well, it should have been murder. If he gets off on everything and is found innocent, then he just got off because he's a white cop and they don't care anything about black. You know how the picture gets painted. Thus far, the defense has torn down pretty much every witness, has just taken their testimony and pretty much destroyed it. One to the point that the defense is actually going to call one of the prosecution's witnesses as a defense witness. They added it over. Now, the policeman, the police chief that had all this done, saw this camera angle of Derek Chauvin's knee that was not placed on George Floyd's neck, and he admitted that no, that was not. He was not applying pressure to George Floyd's neck. That he essentially admitted that he'd gotten it wrong. Um, Another thing that the defense brought up, and it's very, very hard to hear, and it's one of those things where, okay, they tell you that this person said something, there's a lot of noise going on, there's a lot of stuff going on around them, a lot of people yelling and so on and so forth. Um, but it sounded like George Floyd said, I ate too many drugs, knew he had overdosed. Maybe they'll be able to filter out what he said and make that clearer. Uh, it's one of those things I wouldn't have been able to pick out had they not said this is what he said. And that could hurt or help the prosecution. If Derek Chauvin heard him say, I ate too many drugs, maybe he should have acted differently in that particular situation. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure how that's going to pan out. One of the people that the defense called was someone who essentially trains officers in how much force to use and in what situation. And he actually testified. He said, yeah, Officer Chauvin could have used a lot more force, should have, and probably most people would have tased George Floyd because he had resisted arrest. He was acting out of his head. They tried to put him in the patrol car, and he kicked the officers off of him and begged to be laid on the ground, said he was claustrophobic, so on and so forth. They found in the car a what they call a speedball that George Floyd had spit out. They found it was a combination of, if I understand correctly, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and George Floyd's DNA. Uh, the judge had mentioned it, and I also saw a still shot from one of the police officers' cameras uh, where George Floyd had his mouth open when he was still in the SUV that he was arrested in. He had his mouth open, and you could see something white on his tongue. Uh, he had, in a previous arrest, eaten his drugs, and had to go to the hospital. His girlfriend testified on the stand that a couple months earlier that he had taken an overdose and she had to take him to the hospital. So, uh, this guy was out of his mind. He also had a heart condition. He had several blockages going to the left ventricle of the heart, which is, they call that a widowmaker heart attack. I know I've had two of them. So these massive amounts of drugs made him more susceptible to uh, dying from a drug overdose due to heart failure. He was also COVID-19 positive. He tested positive for COVID-19. I think he told the officers that he had it. But irregardless, that is a disease, as most of us know by now, that specifically attacks the lungs and makes respiration more difficult. So that could have been a factor. Maybe he was asymptomatic. I don't know. He was a smoker as well, smoked cigarettes. He had THC from marijuana in his system. Uh, Not that that had anything to do with his death, other than possibly contributing to his inability to uh, to breathe well to begin with. plus this massive amount of drugs in him. So there's a lot more going on here than what we originally thought. Now, one of the things that the prosecution brought up was that uh, Derek Chauvin kept that hold in place even after George Floyd was not showing any signs of movement. Until the paramedics got there, he didn't get off. So you think, well, he's pinning a dead guy, which odds are he was for, a minute or two, maybe seconds, maybe a couple of minutes. The caveat to this is, as I understand it, that when people are, if you're in a hostile situation where people are trying to charge you, you keep your place. You hold whoever you got. You hold them there. Okay, and there was video of people trying to get to Officer Chauvin. There were other officers holding back people who were trying to get to the officer. So that's going to be a difficult one to prove. There was a lot of people yelling, screaming, times going by in his head, who knows how fast. Your concept of time, he's got 1,000 things going on at once, and he's worried about his own life, his own safety and well-being, along with having, with needing to pay attention to this person that he's got pinned to the ground. Something else, George Floyd and Derek Chauvin knew each other, at least in some capacity. I'm not saying they were bosom buddy, pals, friends, whatever, but apparently they had both worked at a bar at the same time. Now, I don't know if it was the same shift. I don't know, if they were friendly to each other, if they hated each other, or what have you. I don't even know what they did. One of them may have been checking people in at the door. One of them may have been a bouncer. Maybe they were both bouncers. I don't know. George Floyd, if I understand correctly, was 6'6", and I think it was 230 pounds. This is a big guy and not fat. He was very muscular. Derek Chauvin, 5'9", 140 pounds. So when you're that outgunned physically, you're going to err on the side of caution to your own health and well-being. And this guy was jacked. I mean, George Floyd was jacked. He's speedballing. He's got methamphetamine in him. He's got fentanyl in him. He ain't feeling no pain. And you don't know. He doesn't know the physical condition. Now, they may have been on good terms. Maybe that is why, oh man, I know this guy. I'm not going to tase him. Let's just try to get him here safe. George Floyd begged to be put on the ground. Okay, this is what they were taught to do. This is how you restrain somebody. I don't agree with it. I think if you've got them handcuffed, laying face down, there's probably better ways of doing it, but I'm not a cop. I'm not trained in that. Now, as I understand it, they had changed the training not long before this, as far as, you still use the hold, but maybe you couldn't hold him there as long, or something to that effect. However, Derek Chauvin was not trained in uh, the newer method. He hadn't gone through that training yet. He had the older method of training. What that is, whether he was operating within those parameters, I don't know. I'm sure the defense will bring that out if it is pertinent and works in his favor. I'm sure that the prosecution will shed more light on it if it works in their favor. So far, they've been pretty shaky on this. Now, the county or city, I think it was the county, they settled a case with George Floyd's family. I believe it was $27 million. And at first I thought, now this is, this is going to hurt Derek Chauvin. And maybe it will. And maybe it will. But it says to me, and I haven't looked at that case, I don't know exactly what the ruling was and why, but it would seem to me that since immediately after this incident, they removed this particular hold from their training procedure. They banned it completely. So that may be an admission of guilt by the county or the city that they had trained their officers wrong and that they were responsible for George Floyd's death for mistraining their officers. I don't know. That's something that I'll be watching for, and it may actually work in Derek Chauvin's favor. Uh, it's looking less and less like this was an intentional uh, murder. I don't think, and it's just not panning out for the prosecution thus far. Maybe they've got some tricks to pull out of their hat, but thus far it is not looking like uh, second or even third degree murder is going to be particularly easy for them to prosecute him on at this point. So that's what I'm seeing. Manslaughter, you still got to have intent. You still got to have uh, not so much intent, but a knowledge, a working knowledge that what you were doing was endangering the life of this man. That you knew that there was a possibility you were killing the guy and you did it anyway. And that gets into a state of mind that's going to be a hard thing to prove, especially with the training given, with the amount of drugs that he had in him, and George Floyd's previous record of being very much prone to resisting arrest. He was a violent criminal, at least in the past. People had talked about how he was turning his life around, but his girlfriend's admission that he had, she had personally taken him to the hospital ODing on drugs. Now, one of the witnesses that the prosecution called ended up pleading the Fifth Amendment because it was George Floyd's drug dealer. And in that state, if you sell somebody drugs that they die from, then you can be charged with third degree murder. And this was his drug dealer that sold him that was in the vehicle with him that perhaps sold him the drugs that killed him. So that witness is out. So that's kind of where we're at so far. Another thing that I have, that the defense seems to be pushing for, they're having a hard time getting straight answers. The guy that they're asking is, I don't think he did the autopsy, but he kind of, you know, this was the cause of death. This is what I determined from the results of the autopsy, that George Floyd died of, I think they said, asphyxia, which is a lack of oxygen. Something that the lungs do two things. Of course, you breathe in, you get oxygen from the air. The blood picks it up in the lungs. The blood also transfers the CO2, the carbon dioxide, to the air that you breathe out. Now, if your lungs are functioning properly, you can die from lack of oxygen before the CO2 level in the blood gets particularly high. One of the side effects, as I understand it, and I am no more a doctor than I am a lawyer, I am neither. This is my opinion. This is what I'm getting from what I'm hearing and trying to understand. So please do your own research and don't take what I'm saying as gospel. But one of the effects of fentanyl, and according to one witness, said the way that it kills is that your body no longer expels the CO2. It hinders that particular function of the lungs to transfer the CO2 out of the body. So the CO2 level, if you die from a drug overdose of fentanyl, the CO2 level rises up. Now, a dead person, the oxygen level means nothing when they're dead. Of course, they had oxygen deprivation. That CO2 level, as I understand it, is important in determining whether it was asphyxiated from the weight on his neck, or whether this asphyxiation was drug induced from the fentanyl. So, anyway, that's where I see the case so far. Looking at listening to the lawyers, the people that know much more than I do, and trying to explain what I've seen and heard thus far in the case and the questioning, and a lot of it's just dry as dirt, and I've been busy, and it's been hard to piece this all together. But hopefully, I've gotten a good enough grasp on it that maybe it will help you understand what's going on and why this isn't the open and shut case that most of us thought it was going to be, or I assume most of us thought it was going to be when we first saw that little snippet of a video that was pushed to show police brutality, racism, so on and so forth. Anyway, I'll leave this one here for now, and God bless you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Please like, share, and subscribe, and y'all be kind to one another. And I'll be talking to you again very, very soon. Take care now. Love y'all. Bye.